Welcome to the Real Paranormal Stories podcast with your host, Christopher Buckner. Send your stories to realparanormalstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Royalty-free music provided by Kevin MacLeod and Tabletop Audio. And now, let's take a trip into the paranormal. This story comes from Reddit user Udugigadi, and this is their story. I spent my early 20s traveling a ton. I worked part-time with an imported car company that did shows all over the South. Several times a year I would drive from Florida to Kentucky, Tennessee to Georgia, all over the place. Often these trips I would end up taking some strange country or county roads to avoid highways early in the morning. During the worst drive of my life, 3 things happened that I can't explain. The first happened around 1 a.m. My GPS tells me to take the most sudden exit onto a side road off the interstate. It's nothing but farmland and trees, but my GPS swears it's a shortcut. I'm cruising for 5 minutes or so when an old Mustang pulled up behind me flashing their lights. They rode my bumper for about 15 minutes, but there was nowhere to pull off in the middle of all the countryside. They revved up and I thought they were finally going to pass me, as there was no oncoming traffic. We were the only ones on the road for miles, but the car never passed me. I physically turned my head to check my blind spot and the car was gone. There was no turnoff or area for them to have pulled over. It just straight up disappeared. When I got back on the interstate, 30 minutes had passed, but I was right back at the same exit I had taken to get off. I had been on a long, straight, dark road for 30 minutes and ended up exactly where I had started. A couple hours pass and I'm now 10 hours into my drive and only 2 hours from my home. I turn off the interstate onto a county road that leads to the highway my house was on. It was a local shortcut I had taken many, many times, only about 2 cities over from my own. It was a little after 3 a.m. I go for a cigarette to keep me awake on the last leg of the ride, and my lighter runs out. As I'm fixing to put the cigarette back in the pack, I pass a poorly lit gas station. Perfect. I pulled into the parking lot and decided to fill up. While I'm at the pump, I notice inside there are 2 people. An old Mima-looking woman in a muumuu at the register, and a big old redneck fella in overalls in the aisle. They're facing each other like they're in a conversation, but neither of them are moving. I make my way cautiously inside and approach the register for a Bic lighter. I didn't see any, so I asked the woman at the front if she had any. She looked at me like I was from Mars. I tried to explain I just wanted a lighter from my cigarettes, and she goes, "Oh, I have matches if that's what you're looking for." She hands me a box of matches and charges me for them. I thank her and turn to leave when I realize the man in the overalls still hasn't moved. But I can feel him watching me. I'm 19 or 20 years old and 125 pounds soaking wet at this point in my life. The hair on the back of my neck is standing straight up, and my brain is yelling at me to get the hell out of there. I quickly make it to my car, and the exact moment I turn on my engine, every light in the gas station goes off. Inside, outside, the pumps, the street light. It's pitch black except for my headlights. My tires squealed. I tore out of that parking lot so fast. I kept that box of matches for years to solidify in my mind that that experience actually happened. Every time I went back on that county road, I searched for that gas station and never saw it again. At this point, I'm not 45 minutes away from the state line and an hour from my comfy bed. I'm freaked out and beyond exhausted. I had been up for 2 days and could go cross-eyed. I had been staring at the road so long. I'm still on the same road, but I am a long way from the gas station, and I'm still trying to put it out of my mind, when all of a sudden I see blue lights behind me. Now, my father was a police officer for 26 years. I remember the year police cars went from the old school rotating lights to the new LED bar lights. This hellacious road trip was probably around 2016, and behind me was the old school rotating light. It was too dark to see what kind of car they sat on. I just saw blue. I luckily had a friend who was a sheriff deputy a couple cities over and called him, knowing he worked night shifts and would still be awake. I asked him if he knew of any departments that still used these old lights, and he told me none in the entire state had them. He told me to keep driving until I saw a public spot to pull over, but absolutely not to stop on the dark side of the road. I drove for a solid 30 minutes, keeping my friend on the phone with me, the blue lights trailing behind me the whole way. I finally hit the crossroad where the county road meets the highway. I'm almost 20 minutes from my home. I pulled into a very well-lit gas station at the intersection, a gas station that I stopped at almost daily on my way to work and felt very comfortable at. The blue lights behind me suddenly cut off, and the car sped off too fast for me to get the license plate or a good description. I went inside the gas station, bought a Red Bull and a pack of smokes from the little lady at the gas station whose familiar face and friendly smile felt like a warm welcome back to reality. I got home that morning and checked all my doors several times before falling asleep. Soon after, I quit traveling with the car show. To this day, I hate driving by myself. I always bring a friend or my dog on long road trips. And no matter what the GPS says, I stay on the highways and interstates. I have only told this story to 2 or 3 people over the years in fear of people not believing me. I still swear I fell into a time warp, or maybe the Twilight Zone. I'm now married to my police officer friend, and he very clearly remembers that night as he was on the phone with me several times throughout the night. We've only talked about it once. And that is their story. This story comes from Reddit user Sandwich Fries. And this is their story. My friend and I are still questioning our mental health after experiencing this. We were going for a walk when we passed by the large primary school and heard the sound of children crying, laughing, and screaming like usual. We laughed it off until I heard one of the children say something to me, calling my name. I turned around to see the children still casually playing. No child was looking at me. My friend noticed I stopped walking because I was confused by what I heard. Then, a few children began talking at once, saying something to us that only an ex-friend would say. About 20 or so children were talking at once, in the same beat, and they were calling me a nasty person who had betrayed them, something my ex-friend would say. It felt as if something was using their mouths to speak. I thought I was hallucinating, but my friend who was standing right next to me was hearing it too. She was as astounded as I was. For a few minutes it went on. Something was berating us through their mouths. The teacher on yard duty seemed to pay no attention to this event, despite walking past them. I assumed she thought the children were playing a prank. But were they? The other children who were not involved seemed to completely ignore it. And that is their story. That's all for this episode of the Real Paranormal Stories podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a review anywhere this podcast can be found.